So today I'm going to be talking about the real value we offer our patients, and it's a topic that is important as it relates especially to our interaction and involvement with social media. If you're feeling at all overwhelmed, maybe experiencing imposter syndrome, maybe feeling exhausted, a lot of times we can attribute that to just burnout and work overload. But I think that social media can actually play a role in some of these emotions as well. And so I want to help you sort of get unstuck from some of those emotions today. What I want to cover today is a challenge that we all find ourselves in when it comes to social media. I want to talk about a common trap that we can fall into, as well as two key impacts on practice. The key belief that we actually need to shift around the value that we provide and who we are, and then also some practical steps forward. So I would definitely get some practical component in here as well. Just a brief intro about myself. I've been a practicing physiotherapist for 14 years now. I write and podcast about clinical performance and growth. I'm a Jane ambassador. I've also written a book on sleep health, specifically targeting movement clinicians like physios and other rehab professionals, really helping to getting up to speed on sleep health for your patients. So I wanted to start off with saying that we have so much information thrown at us, on a daily basis, new journal articles, social media, email, newsletters, all these different things. And it just really is never ending. I did a quick search and looked at, what amount of data is actually being created on a daily basis. And there's 40,000 Google searches done every second. Now, this is in 2018, so I'm sure that's probably doubled by this point. And at that time, it was 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created every day, which is really hard to sort of imagine how much data that actually is. The bottom line is there's a ton of data, and social media is a fire hose of information as well. And while it can have a lot of good components to it and can be a source of inspiration, it also can be overwhelming, and there can be a downside as well. And you just, this is I just grabbed off of Instagram and some TikTok or whatever, just some different posts, and there's a ton, right? And as I said, it can be beneficial, can be a source of inspiration, but there can be a downside. I think there's two key impacts that it can have. The first I want to talk about is the impact that it can have on our treatments and sort of in our treatment room. But then the second is just even in terms of the impact that it has on how we view ourselves as clinicians. And I want to talk about, a common scenario that I have come across myself and in talking to clinicians. And I just had this happen a while ago where I had a patient who had, stiff joint, was arthritic, and I was just looking to improve on some range of motion and looking at mobilizing the joint. And I defaulted to something that I had seen on social media. And it was something that I was somewhat comfortable with, but still hadn't done in a while. And it was interesting how I sort of just went to that particular technique because I had seen it recently. And it seemed to be okay during the session, but the patient did have a bit of a flare up, and it made me reflect on, okay, what was going on here and why did I choose that? And making that connection to what actually I saw on social media with that. And this can happen, when you're feeling stuck, maybe you're feeling that you're a bit thrown off in the session and you need an idea. Maybe you're feeling inadequate in terms of what's going on with the case presentation. And, we can end up almost having this angel and devil on our shoulders, especially when we're sort of confronted with, do I use something that I just saw or not? On the one side, the angel says, well, maybe it's better to hold off on giving this exercise. Let's think this through a bit more. But then the devil on the other shoulder saying, well, hey, what's the big deal? They'll be impressed. It's easy. It's not going to be big of an issue. And we can feel a bit of a conflict in terms of what we should be doing in that moment. And it can have some negative impacts, right? It can result in poor execution of the exercise or the treatment, whatever it is. We may be applying it to an incorrect stage of healing. It may be too advanced or inappropriate for the patient that's in front of us. And so definitely it's something that I think can impact us in terms of the treatment room. And part of that is that recency bias that I was mentioning, and that's that tendency to base our thinking and our decision-making on information that most easily comes to mind. And it's something that we can happen almost subconsciously. We're not even, totally aware of that it's happening. But I think as we reflect back on situations, we can definitely see how this bias can play in. So I just talked about the impact that it can have in the treatment room. But I think it also, and more importantly, it can really impact how we view ourselves as healthcare providers. And I think the big thing is that it really can fuel this imposter syndrome, which is really the self-doubt around our intellect, our skills, our accomplishments. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. And I think there's an unhealthy pattern that can develop that can really sort of reinforce that. So let's say that you're stressed or bored at work. Maybe there's some patient stress, maybe there's some internal doubt or overwhelm, and you're looking for a bit of a dopamine hit. So what do? We turn to social media. We look for some inspiration. Maybe I feel better about myself now. I've got some new ideas. Maybe I'm feeling a little bit more up to date in terms of what's going on. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the time that when we are engaging in social media, we're consuming it. We're not necessarily putting it into practice. And so what ends up happening is when we don't do anything with that, it can wear off. We sort of get into that withdrawal. And then we can also feel bad about ourselves because we actually experience this gap of what we see versus what we do. And we feel like we're maybe stagnating and not really changing and improving ourselves. And unfortunately, this cycle can go on and repeat itself. And we can actually, in some ways, become addicted a little bit to this dopamine cycle. So I'm just curious in the chat, is this totally foreign to you? Has this happened to you? Just a yes, no, totally. Would just love to know if this is something that sounds familiar. Carol says a yes. Definitely, right? So I think it's something that if we actually take a step back, we can start to see a bit of this pattern that can happen. And what's the result of that, right? What can we feel inside? We can feel like a big ball of yarn, messed up, all sort of discombobulated inside. And we can end up believing that the value we offer is about how much we know. It's about the latest exercise. It's about the coolest exercise. Maybe it's having a bigger database of exercises. And it's really this unquenchable thirst that can take place. And we can end up, if we sort of look below that, have this belief that I'm not enough. I'm missing something about myself. And it's, we can end up falling into a trap where the value we offer centers on how much we know. And this is what I call being a data aggregator, right? It's this idea that we are about aggregating or collecting more and more information. And we just feel like, we have a hard time keeping up to all the information flow that's going on. And so we always just feel like we're behind the 8 ball with that, because there's always more that we could be learning and more that we could be knowing. And we can feel emotionally drained. We can feel frustrated with this. We can feel mentally fatigued, anxious, generally emotions that don't really help us to operate and perform at our best. What I want to say is I don't think that more information is the answer. What we need to do is actually think about how to move up this knowledge pyramid so that we move beyond data and information more into knowledge and wisdom. We're really able to bring value to our patient interactions and help address the issues that patients come to us. And so I think we have to reframe the value that we offer as providers. And I believe that we are sense makers for our patients. We help make sense for our patients in terms of what they're dealing with regards to their pain, their movement issues, whatever it is that they're coming to you with. We help to make sense of it and help them to provide a path forward, whatever that looks like. We help to see what the relationships are and really bring clarity to the situation. And that's what I frame as being called a data integrator, right? This idea of being able to connect the dots, be able to see those relationships. And this little visual here is just a nice simplification of that. On the one side, we have the data aggregator, lots of data points, but maybe not necessarily a ton of different connections. The data integrator, maybe there's fewer data points, but there's more connections happening. There's more value being created because you're actually seeing how things are connecting. So just time for a short little quiz, a 7-question quiz. And this is more about just understanding, okay, do I sort of fall more towards the data aggregator side or do I fall more towards the data integrator side? I don't think it's one of those things that's either or. I think we can definitely shift between the two. But let's just sort of take a minute here to take stock of what's going on. So grab a pen and paper. I'm going to read out these questions. And what I want you to do on the piece of paper is just number the questions and then write yes or no for each of them. So I'm going to read them out, and then we're going to tally up the number of questions that you have yes, and then the certain questions that you have no. So number 1, I regularly feel inadequate with the amount of clinical knowledge I have, even after doing ongoing professional development work. So yes or no to that. Number 2, I find myself regularly checking social media feeds when I'm bored or overwhelmed with work. Number 3, when I see an exercise or treatment idea that I'm unfamiliar with, I don't find it impacting my sense of value. And then number 4, I'm confident that I can address my patient's challenges with my current skill set. So I'll just give you a moment here to just look at those before we move on to the remaining questions. I'm going to go on to the next question here. I feel like I'm falling behind when I compare myself to other healthcare providers. Number 6, I question the value that I provide to my patients. And then number 7, I have a clinical reasoning process that helps me to organize my assessment thinking easily and quickly. So I'll just give you a sec here for those. And so what we'll do now is add up questions 1, 2, 5, and 6. So if you answered yes to those, you're going to fall more into the data aggregator column. And if you answered yes to questions 3, 4, and 7, then you're a little more into the data integrator. So hopefully that helps give a little bit of insight in terms of where you fall between data aggregator and data integrator. And just a recap on this. So data aggregator really believes that more info is the answer. When something doesn't work, it's because I am lacking more information. And maybe you had some difficulty around making connections during your assessment, whereas a data integrator recognizes the value is about connecting the data points, has a confidence with how to approach patients because there is more of a focus of I have a confidence in how I can analyze and understand the relationships with what I'm seeing, and has a clinical reasoning process that helps to organize information. So I think in order to operate in a place of being more of a data integrator, being more of a sense maker, I think we need to operate at a different level. And I think what it comes down to is we really need to operate with our best self at heart. And I think it's a combination of bringing the strengths of our personality and values to the table, really leveraging our existing skill set, and then also being able to manage and optimize what's going on for ourselves, our self states, so our thoughts, our beliefs, emotions, because that really does have a huge impact in terms of who we are and how we bring ourselves to our patient interactions. And I think that our state of being really does matter. I mean, it impacts our ability to bring our best selves to our patient interactions. And I write a lot about this idea of clinical flow. So it's sort of based off of what Csikszentmihalyi, who writes and sort of talked about the concept of flow state, and really this idea of a persistent psychological engagement. And what I have explored is more of this idea of like, how do we bring the values of curiosity and collaboration and creativity and courage within our clinical interactions, because that's really where we're going to be able to operate most consistently in a place of clinical flow with our patient interactions. Okay, so how do we get unstuck, right? This is, sort of the second part of this webinar. We've talked a little bit about some of the problems that we can experience. We can find ourselves in terms of the negative impacts of social media. Now what I want to do is talk about how do we actually move forward in that. And I want to walk through 4 keys to getting unstuck when it comes to this whole topic. So first off, I think it's really important to watch your triggers. Are you bored with work? Maybe are you looking for inspiration because you're feeling a sense of inadequacy or just feeling stuck? Are you maybe experiencing increased patient stress? Maybe you're feeling inadequate or more so recently. Maybe you're experiencing more doubt. And that sometimes can be a good check to say, hang on a second, maybe I need to actually limit how much social media I'm engaging in, or maybe I shouldn't be looking at stuff that's going to trigger this sense of self-doubt and this imposter syndrome and all of that. And so it is helpful to look at that and to take stock in yourself, on a weekly basis, like, where am I at? How has this past week been? What am I feeling? What's my general emotional state that I'm working with? And then number two is to really think about reframing your thinking. Challenging our beliefs can sometimes be a little bit messy, can be a little bit uncomfortable. And I think it's really important to try to lean into that discomfort, on a consistent basis, because I think it's when we actually look sort of under the hood that we can start to see what's driving some of our behavior around this. I find it's great to get thoughts on paper. I think that journaling is such an important process with this. I have written about this on my blog around how to go about challenging beliefs within clinical scenarios. And I think then what's important is to then look at, how do we reframe our thinking? How do we start to change what we're telling ourselves, really, at the end of the day? And I'm a big fan of mantras, and because I think we use them with our patients. Often we'll say, motion is lotion. And why does that work? Because it's sticky. It's easy to remember. And so what I like to tell myself is that whenever I'm starting to feel that sense of overwhelm, I'm starting to feel maybe that doubt, maybe I'm feeling the impacts of social media, I'm going to tell myself, I'm a data integrator. I'm not a data aggregator. It's about connecting the dots. It's not about more information. And when we can do that, we can help sort of ground ourselves again more deeply to the value that we do offer our patients, so that we aren't feeling almost off kilter or unbalanced in terms of who we show up in that treatment room. Number three is that we have to be intentional. I think we have to slow down that process, and we have to create some distance. And I think the reason we want to do that is because we want to actually reduce that recency bias. If we can reduce that recency bias, then we're going to be able to have more clarity in our thinking, and we're going to be able to actually leverage some of the stuff that we're seeing on social media in a way that is actually going to be valuable. It's going to be growing for us. It's going to help us rather than hindering us. And so, if we look at this, I've put together some questions here that I think are helpful to look at when it comes to slowing ourselves down and starting to create a bit of space with what's happening. So in this example, I came across this on Instagram, this thoracic rotation exercise. And again, it piqued my interest. And so, what's the focus of this exercise? It's, active thoracic rotation. Why did it pique my interest? Well, because it's interesting that they're doing it in a 4-point position, or a 3-point, I guess. And, it's something that I'm not typically doing with my patients. And this is something that I thought, well, I should look into this a little bit further. Then I need to ask myself, well, who's the intended audience? Well, it's obviously somebody that has already some decent thoracic mobility. They need to be able to, put some weight through their shoulders. They got to be comfortable being in a 4-point position. So I need to, again, take a step back and say, well, what's the challenge level here? Is it beginner? Is it intermediate? Is it advanced? And then what are the prerequisites, right? Well, they need to be able to be in 4-point. They need to have some thoracic mobility, and they need to be comfortable putting that weight through that shoulder and supporting their neck in that position. And then, are there any contraindications? And then, have I actually practiced this personally, right? I think this is another thing, is that we can see this and it feels like, oh, it's no big deal to do this because I just saw this recently on social media. It seems simple enough, but have I actually put this into practice myself and worked through it through this? So what this does is it slows things down. It helps you to actually think through some things in terms of where this application of this exercise should be, and who is it not for? And then what happens is that you're now going to be able to be a little bit more judicious in terms of, who you're applying this to. So what I have done is I've created a template for this with those questions that you'll have access to, that you can start to go through. And I'm going to walk through, what that looks like. But again, I think it's just to sort of really make it practical. We can say, well, hey, we should, be careful about recency bias, or we should, be careful about the impacts of social media. And I think, again, that can be positive, but I think we have to also try to mitigate some of the negatives that can take place there. So how do you make it practical? So what I would do, and this is what I do, is I take a screenshot of my phone of the exercise. So if it's on, TikTok, or if it's on Instagram or whatever, I'll take a screenshot of it, and I'll typically take a screenshot of the beginning part of it and then the middle part of the exercise, so I know what the actual movement is. And then what I'll do is I'll export that and then upload it to this Google template. And then I'll do that with a few exercises so that I can actually batch multiple exercises at once. So I'm not spending all this time going through this process for each individual exercise. And then I'll print off the template. And then when there's downtimes, I'll actually fill it out so that I can actually go through that process. And so what that does, again, is it, recognizes that, if you're a busy clinical practice, you're not going to have time in that moment to do that, but there's going to be moments of downtime that you can then just fill that out. And you don't need to be in front of the computer to do that either. And then you can create a bit of a data bank of those exercises that you're really in a better place to integrate into your clinical practice. So how do you access the template? You can just head over to 360clinician.com/integrator. And so it is a Google slide, so you can actually save that to your own Google Drive. And what that will do is, allow you to just basically create a data bank. And so what I'd encourage you to do is save a copy to your Google Drive. And then what you can do is, and I'm just going to pull this up here, is you can then just see here. So you can pull this up, and so then you'll see here's an example that I have, and then here's the actual template. And so what I did here was I actually just uploaded this image that I had on my phone, popped in the start position and the action position for this, and then you can fill this out on the computer, but it's just as easy to just print that off and then just fill it out by hand. But then what you can do is you can actually just duplicate the slide here, so that you can just do that for more and more of these exercises that you come across. And so what this then allows you to do is a simple, easy way to have a bit of a system and a process, so it doesn't feel haphazard. I'm just going to come back to my slides. Okay. All right. So quick recap in terms of what we've covered today. So one is we talked about the impacts of social media on clinical practice, that there are some downside risks and the impact that it can have in terms of how we view ourselves, the importance of how we reframe the value that we offer our patients, and why we need to be operating at a different level where we can really bring our best self to the table on a consistent basis. And then I also talked about 4 key ways to get unstuck with using social media, and really a practical way to actually harness the ideas that you do come across on a more consistent basis. And I had a friend tell me this a while ago, and I think it's so true. It's not about information, it's about transformation. And I think that's really at the core of what I've been sharing today, is how do we actually improve ourselves so that we move forward in terms of our own growth and development, and don't just be collectors and aggregators of information. And so before we head to the Q&A, I just want to give you a heads up that I am doing an upcoming workshop around exercise adherence. And so a lot of times, we give exercises to patients, and sometimes they can have a challenge doing them consistently. And I've created a system that I've clinically tested that works really well, that uses some of the different behavioral psychology techniques to collaborate with your patient. And it's really low tech to make that easy for patients to integrate into their daily life. And I do have a coupon code for early bird discount. So if you head over to 360clinician.com, and the link will be in the chat there. I'll be doing that later in October. And you can also feel free to join me with my newsletter, where I write once a month about clinical performance and how to improve yourself, as well as I'm on Instagram at 360clinician, where I do post content relating to clinical performance and improvement. And we now are ready for Q&A. So I have a question here. What is patient stress? Yeah, so I would say it was more like sort of stress around the patient interaction. So maybe I misworded that. It's more about that stress that you would be feeling in an interaction, there might be a bit of a dynamic going on that may be difficult, or you might feel like you're having a hard time connecting with them personally, because they're just such a different personality type. Those are some of the stressors that can make it difficult. I've had it sometimes too, where I can feel a little bit off guard when a patient sort of seems standoffish, and they sort of seem like they're not really buying what I'm saying, and I can now start to feel like I've got to come up with something more interesting. And just recognizing that's sort of that stress in terms of that patient interaction that can influence the decisions you make in terms of how you approach treatment. Okay. Any other questions? Awesome. All right. Well, I hope that this has been helpful. And I really would encourage you, as you go through your work day, clinical day, to see sort of how social media has potentially influencing the decisions you're making, thinking about that recency bias. And I encourage you to use that worksheet. There's no email requirement or anything like that, so you can just head over that page and make a copy of it to use for your own purposes. So definitely just want to help you in terms of just feeling less overwhelm and less negative impact when it comes to social media.